Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of Literary Nights with Unsolicited Press. We have two amazing writers this evening, but before we continue, I want to remind everyone to smash the like button from where you're watching, follow or subscribe, so this way you can know when our new streamed readings are live. And don't forget to follow us. And also, I wanted to let you know that if you have comments or questions, you can post them from wherever you're watching in the comment section, and all of us will see them. So, welcome Adele Evershed and Elizabeth Jaeger. Tonight, we're going to hear fiction and nonfiction. As you know, we usually go by alphabetical order, first name. So, welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we are excited to hear your work. So, Adele, since you are the A person, the A name here, I'm hoping you could tell us a little bit about your book, which sounds like it's an astonishing collection of flash fiction that's linked. I think that's very unique. So, let's hear the title of your book, when it was published, and some of your readings.
Okay, thank you, Rosalia. So yes, my name's Adele Evershed. I have got a book coming out not till that's next week. And it's called, I don't know if you can see that, A History of Hand-Thrown Walls. And I have to say, I just love the cover. I was thrilled when I saw it. And say I'm very excited for next week. So it is a novella in flash, which is basically every story is under 1,000 words. And each story is linked in this collection by the stone walls that you see in Connecticut. I live in Connecticut now. Well, I'm sure you can tell I'm not originally from America. But when I first arrived here and we'd go out walking, I would see these stone walls like in the middle of everywhere, in the middle of woods, in the middle of fields, and I couldn't work out what they were. And I'm very lucky, I live in Wilton, Connecticut. They have a national park here called Weir Farm. And there was a leaflet about the stone walls. So I picked it up and I read through it, and that's how the book was born. So it does span from before colonial times all the way through to COVID and a little bit beyond. And I was writing this during the first Trump administration, so you can see how long ago that was and how long a book takes to come to fruition. So I'm going to read a few extracts from it, but at the beginning of my book, I have an epigraph by Robert Frost. It says, "Before I build a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out," from his poem Mending Walls. And if you know that poem at all, you'll know that it's about two men who every year walk the boundary wall of their farms and they repair it. And sometimes it's been destroyed by nature, sometimes it's been destroyed by hunters, and they get together and they build it up. And as they are walking, they talk and exchange the time of day. At one point, what the narrator of the poem basically says, "Well, why are we doing this? I grow apple trees, you have pine trees. Do we really need this wall?" And the person he's walking with replies, "Well, like my father always said," I'm sure maybe some of you even heard this, "good fences make good neighbours." And the narrator sort of starts to question this. What does that mean? We don't have cows, why do we need it? But his companion is so caught up in the tradition, he cannot get away from his father's phrase. And so that is, in fact, the final line of the poem, "Good fences make good neighbours." So in his poem, Frost sort of explores boundaries versus connections, tradition versus like questioning, nature versus human effort, and communication versus silence. And I'm hoping that my book sort of addresses those issues as well. So the first piece I'm going to read is called The Wisdom of the Whippoorwill, and it's written from a Native American point of view. The first story was called Stone Steps because I had, even though it's fiction, I'd done a lot of research, and Native Americans built their own walls, usually in the shape of a serpent in Connecticut. But it had more of a sort of meaning about the celestial beings and the seasons. So this is the second story in the collection. The Wisdom of the Whippoorwill. At the edge of the world, the white man banned high voices. It came as no surprise. They always preferred to start arguments in empty rooms, knowing that was the only way they could win. When the tribes grumbled, and their grumbles grew legs to take them beyond our rocky borders, the white man started collecting tongues. They buried them in meadows, promising now only the grass would remember the songs. They had forgotten. Grass is made of blades, and it might cover all the spoilt places, but it can whisper songs of rebellion when the wind moves it. I sit in the pasture, using a blade to tattoo my face with my snake mother's wisdom. I chant an elegy to the breeze about how she puffed silk-cut smoke from her nose. When I was little, she wrapped me in ancient threads, the colour of spring grass, and I traced the flying bird on the belt she always wore. She told me it was her magic girdle, and it held the secret language of women, songs of survival and hard-won knowledge. She touched each bead and stone like a strange sort of braille, and sang me to sleep, so I drifted away on tales of women healers and recipes to summon the help of the little people, those kindly spirits that taught us how to grow corn and use healing plants. They keep the earth well and grant favours for those who honour their ways. The red stone eye of the eagle in her girdle glowed, pulsing in the dark wigwam, and it syncopated with the humming in my bones. The stone can make the night seem like the day, and the belt was passed down from mother to daughter as a talisman against injury. We lived in the high chink of Moshup's Rock, named for the giant who in his temper threw the rocks that littered our land. Alongside us lived the tarnished walleye, their spotty yellow backs mirrored in the dyed feathers dangling from my mother's doughy lobes. It took slow seasons for us to hear the squeaking of the white man, yet when it woke my father and brothers, they painted their faces black and yellow to show they were willing to fight. They left, and white men as large as Moshup's ghost killed many women and children, screaming they were taking vengeance upon the heathen. One captured mother and I and took us to live on his settlement. He would not let us daub our faces in white to mourn our men, calling it a pagan ritual. It was a double wound. This man, with a ragged mark upon his face the others called Reverend, insisted the word of his God declared women and children should sometimes perish, and it was a meritorious deed to teach the savages to live as human beings. He named their settlement New Canaan and said they were the chosen people. He also would not let mother and I sing our songs to the bread to make it soft. So quickly the food we made for our captors was flat and hard, like him. Then, of course, he complained. So my mother hummed quietly before sliding the loaves into the clay oven. But we both knew it would only help a little bit. Then he chipped a tooth on his walnut breakfast bread, and his red words left brands on my mother's skin. I implored him to let us sing, but he threatened to cut out my tongue if I even dared speak, banished me to a silent breaking. That night my mother wrapped herself in a sooty cape and crept to the banks of the river. She trilled to bring the fish and begged them to save my voice. She asked them to hide me with the mottled whippoorwill so I could feast on nectar and learn how to build a nest from cobwebs and bark. I would call quirt in ringing notes to drive away predators and live unafraid to show my black and white bibbed throat. But the fish were always mean and bony specimens that liked to drive a hard bargain. My mother had to barter her girdle to warm their spindly bodies before they would hold me in their mouth and swim away. They left her naked and unprotected. Her last kindness was to smother our jailer so he could not hunt me down. She shaped him into red garnets and scattered them over our home, the place the white man now calls the Devil's Footprint. I stayed with the birds, learning to gather cobwebs, pollinate plants, and look in at doors. I sharpened my beak on the white notched stone I found in the forest. But before I could still hear but I could still hear the humming of my mother and her mother before her. It buoyed a boat hidden in my bones, so I regrew my legs and floated off to sit in the long grass. I have gathered all the songs, and it is time for me to raise my voice and smash things. Around my neck I have hung an amulet of bright red stones, so it will be close to my throat as I sing. Listen in the bright dawn, and you will hear tender violence, the noise of women, and you will know that a song can make you a revolutionary or a coward. The choice was always yours. So I'm going to skip ahead in history to the Depression. That one was in Connecticut. This one takes place in Appalachia, and I've sort of worked it how the Stones get to Appalachia. So you have to read the whole thing to really get the taste. But here we go. Blackberry Winter. We all knew Bernie was dead. Papa had even dug a hole next to Johnny's grave beside the low-slung wall of stones that bound our small patch on this earth. When he came in, he took off his work boots and told Mama, "Johnny will be a good big brother and look after our baby girl until we all meet in heaven, God willing." Mama didn't say anything. She rocked Bernie in the cradle on the floor and picked up a rag to clean off the clod from his boots, as if Papa might need them to go back to work soon. But Papa's job, like Johnny, had been gone for a long while now. The following day, Mama peeled herself from her chair and spruced up the house as if we were expecting company. Then she turned her attention to my brothers and me, slicking down their hair and saying to me, "Now, Maybug, get yourself out of those raggedy pants and put on your best polka dot dress." When none of us moved, she snapped, "Hurry now. Why are you lolling about like a puddle of long sweetening?" Papa took her gently by the shoulders and tried to lead her back to her seat, but she shook him off like a shower of rain. Mama looked slouchwise at him and shuddered as if she was breaking from the inside out. And then she unpacked her black dress, the one she kept wrapped in plastic. The rustling made me think of the wren that had flown into our house the week before Bernie passed. Mama had taken the broom to it, stunning it, and as I watched, she hit the wee mottled bird with a cooking pan. I let out a squeal like one of the wild piglets, and Mama turned to me, her eyes like foxfire, and said, "Oh, Maybug, I need to get it before it could get word to God." Teacher had declared all these old beliefs just superstition, but I could see Mama was scared. She believed if a bird flies into the home, someone would die. After my sister Bernie passed away, I never put much store by what teacher said ever again. Mama stood up straight as if she was addressing the Reverend and said, "I've been studying about how to say this till I nigh wearied myself to death. Mary Jo told me—" Papa interrupted, tutting, "Now that woman's tongue's a mile long. I put no more store by her than any of her wild tales." Mama continued as if he hadn't spoken. "There's a man taking photos for a New York magazine in the Cove. He's already been to the Mobleys to photograph poor wee River. You know she's backset with the measles." Papa stretched his neck as if he had a crick. "I hope you ain't saying that mule trader is hooving himself here." His voice had deepened and his eyes were like chips of coal. I could feel the whispers in the air that Papa could let loose when he was vexed, and I backed against the wall. My brother Skittish came to join me. I took my lucky white stone out of my pocket. It was the only thing Papa brought from his home in Bridgeport when he came here to mine coal. His mama had given it to him as a good luck token and told him it was thank you a gift for the family of a girl she had prepared for burial. It was shaped like a heart with a hole in the middle that I can fit my pinky finger in. It feels rough, like the scars on Mama's arms. But although Mama peeked, she said, "I allowed he'd get here this afternoon." Mama picked up Bernie from the cradle and started to sing a lullaby as she dressed her in the white coat and matching booties she'd knitted not a year ago. This was the only time I ever saw Mama defy Papa, and it not end in a whooping. The man from Time magazine came and took our photo. It was a blue cold day when he crossed over Lime Fork Creek on the rickety bridge to our two-room shack. But at least the temperature meant he couldn't smell the sewage frozen in the water. Papa told us all not to smile, said it wouldn't be proper, and he refused to put on his boots or put out his roll-up. When the photographer left, Mama pressed the heart stone into his palm as a thank you. He looked at it and seemed about to give it back to her, but I think the look in his eyes stopped him. He slipped it into one of the pockets of his coat that crackled like bacon when he moved. Later, Mary Jo cut out the photo and brought it over for Mama. When Papa saw it, he took the belt to Mama, leaving her with indigo bruises up and down her arms. All that winter, Papa raised welts on Mama. They sprang up like clumps of blackberries on the forest of her body. And like a forest, Mama stayed silent, letting the fury pass over her like the wind. Papa never said why the photo made him so vexed, but I think it was because Mama was smiling, and he knew nothing we could do would ever make her smile again. Okay, and I'm going to finish with one at the very end. It's very short. It's called Making Peace with Daffodils. Leaving the house after so long, I walk past the two huge boulders that stand like disapproving sentinels. I can't shake the feeling I have forgotten something. I rummage through my bag, but all the important things are there. Purse, keys, spare mask. Good to go then. As I start the car, the low fuel light comes on, and then the low tyre pressure light, alternating in flashing neon like the start of a migraine. I realise I will have to sort it out now, and this starts the tears again. The radio is turned to Garrett's favourite station, the BBC World Service. A deep voice speaks over my whimpering. A song can make you an alcoholic or a revolutionary. This is so preposterous I let out a bark of laughter, and I'm shocked by the sound. I change channels. A bright female voice says, "Dandelions get a bad press. In fact, they are spectacular. Their petals a lion's mane roaring, magically turning into fairy wings as..." A man with clipped tones interrupts her. Very poetic, I'm sure, but they do ruin your lawn. And immediately, Garrett is back from the dead, fighting the dandelions, spraying poison like a demented monk sprinkling holy water. I tried to get him to be more environmentally friendly, mixing up a solution of water and vinegar. It proved ineffective, and it left behind a lingering smell of disappointment that with all his chemicals he couldn't banish. Looking over at the grass now, I know he would be proud. It is a green carpet, lush, and oh so dull. Garrett had attended a class at Wilton Park and Rec and learnt how to build a stone wall. It took him months, carefully placing each stone and searching for the perfect match. Now Garrett's hand-built wall borders his lawn, each stone like a face in an admiring gallery. For the last 40 years, I have never gone anywhere without my hand in his. But thinking about it now, his fingers were always as cold as stone in mine, dampening me down. I feel skittish, like a horse without a bridle, as I get out of the car and walk over to the verge. I select a giant dandelion clock and wish as I blow away the tiny white parachute seeds over his wall. They dance like the blessings of a new beginning before settling all over the perfect lawn. And that's it. Thank you.
What wonderful, wonderful stories. Very, very beautifully written and wonderful images. And I love the last one.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear Elizabeth Jaeger read nonfiction from her new book. So, Elizabeth, would you like to tell us about your new book and how it came to be? And we're anxious to hear you read.
Okay, Stolen, Love and Loss in the Time of COVID-19 started out as a blog. On March 16th, 2020, it was the first day of lockdown, the first day that my son, my spouse, and I were home trying to figure out how to work and learn virtually. And we were in a tiny condo and we were miserable and we were cranky. And I decided that night after my son and spouse went to bed to start a blog. And it was really just initially a way to vent. And I figured it would be something that I could look back on in 10 to 20 years and laugh. It was supposed to be something that I would look back on and feel better. Unfortunately, on day 8, my dad got sick with COVID. Day 12, he was hospitalized. And at that point, I kept writing because it was a way to keep family and friends updated into how he was doing, what he was doing. And then, I'm sorry. It was also, as a writer, for me, it was a speck of normalcy that in a world that was completely turned upside down. So I wrote because it was the only thing that made me feel okay at that time. So Stolen was never meant to be a book. And as a result, it's a story in fragments. And there are 3 categories that those fragments fall into. There's the tragedy of my dad getting sick and dying, and then the family processing grief. It also reflects on many of the global the impacts of the pandemic that affected everybody. So there's a lot in the book that people can relate to because we all experienced it. And finally, I think it was on day 10, as my dad was getting sick and things were getting really heavy and serious and depressing, I started to add vignettes, flashbacks to happier times with my dad, memories that still make us smile. So I'm going to read a little from each of those components to give you an idea of what's happening in the book. I'm going to start with day 8, the day that my dad got sick. We were sitting down to dinner when Dad messaged me. I have a fever, 104. Immediately I called him. You need to take Tylenol, I advised. It doesn't work. It never works, he grumbled. Besides, we don't have any. I agree. Tylenol does absolutely nothing for pain. I do not care what the doctors say, but it does reduce the fever. However, with my dad's aversion to it, I was not surprised that they didn't have any in the house. Mom should call Debbie, I suggested. See if she has any. Debbie was a neighbor and my mom's friend. It turned out she didn't have any Tylenol either. So I did the only thing I could do. Without finishing dinner, I was too panicked to eat more. I ran out to the pharmacy. Tylenol apparently disappeared along with all of the toilet paper. All they had was a small travel-sized container. I brought that along with some generic pills. From the pharmacy, I drove right into the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States. The drive to New York City never went so fast. There were hardly any cars on the road. Not a surprise since we were on a modified lockdown and Governor Murphy instituted a curfew. I sailed through Staten Island, which is often a parking lot at the tail end of rush hour. And when I got to Woodhaven Boulevard, it was eerily deserted. I felt like I was in one of those end-of-the-world movies where nearly everyone has died and nothing remains but shadows and silence. Along with the heaviness of Dad getting sick, I started the vignettes. So this was the first vignette that I included in the book. September 1974. I was born on a busy day in the labor and delivery room. Lots of babies drew their first breaths the same day as me, many of them girls. As a result, there were no clean pink receiving blankets when it was my turn to need one. The nurse, therefore, broke protocol and wrapped me in a blue blanket. When she presented me to my father, he was livid. He snapped at the nurse, stating that a baby girl should not be wrapped like a boy. The nurse apologized, explaining her dilemma. Dad asked if there were any yellow blankets, and the nurse quickly exchanged a blue blanket for a yellow. Dad didn't want anyone to think I was a son. Oh, the irony. Perhaps it's the nurse's fault. If I hadn't initially been swaddled in blue, perhaps I'd have grown up to prefer girl clothes, girl colors. Day 12. My mom called me at 4:30 that morning to let me know that my dad was worse and to ask me to please drive back into New York to take dad to the hospital. She called an ambulance first, but the ambulance refused to take my dad to the hospital that he wanted to go to. The ambulance was going to take him to Elmhurst Hospital, which is where patients were dying by the dozen. So, of course, I immediately got dressed and returned to New York. After we dropped my dad off at the hospital, Mom and I returned home where we waited for news. At my parents' house, we waited for the doctor to call. I had too much nervous energy. Plus, I was trying to avoid being inside surrounded by deadly germs. So I went for a walk. While I was out, I called my mom to see if she had heard anything. She did, but she was reluctant to tell me until I got home. Good news doesn't need to wait. I insisted she tell me immediately. It's not good. She sounded distant and far away. His kidneys are failing. He needs dialysis. What does that mean? Will he make it? The doctor's not sure. Sometimes people pull through after dialysis, but with the virus, it all happened so fast. Too fast. We had plans. We were supposed to wait out the pandemic together in Long Island. We were supposed to go to Disney. I promised my son he'd see Dad again. We should have taken him yesterday, I said, berating myself. The doctor said it wouldn't have mattered. In all likelihood, they would have sent him home if he wasn't this bad. Send him home, but it's the virus. Mom cut me off. Things are different. Even the doctors are trying to figure it all out. I'll be home soon. I hung up and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not since my grandmother died. Not since I was my son's age and I lost the grandparent I loved most. The grandparent who meant the world to me, as my father means the world to my son. Dad is his rock, his idol, his hero. And now, I couldn't stop the tears. Forget what you see on the news. This is the face of the coronavirus. A 10-year-old curled up on the couch crying. A beloved grandson dressed up like a gangster and shooting imaginary enemies because he can't kill the real one. A 10-year-old whose heart is breaking. A little boy who is looking forward to another summer on the beach with his grandfather. The pandemic isn't about statistics or a failed federal government. It certainly isn't a hoax. It's about one of the people I love most being taken from me way too soon. After that, I'm going to go back to something a little lighter again. Another vignette about my dad. This was the night that I told him I was getting married. Fall 2004. When my spouse proposed to me, I was living with my parents. One afternoon, she came over for dinner, and we told my parents that we were going to get married. Dad looked at me with a big smile and said, "Does this mean you're finally moving out?" Then his eyes shifted to my spouse, and he added, "Or does it mean you're moving in?" We all chuckled. I had moved in and out so many times it started to seem like I was a boomerang. Come to think of it, even after my son was born, I was here visiting an awful lot. They never really did get rid of me. After our laughter settled down, Dad hugged me and said, "I really just need to know how I'm supposed to address an envelope." I was marrying a woman, but it didn't matter. Dad handled that like he handled everything, with a touch of humor. I had mentioned that there were just some things about the pandemic, life during the pandemic, and how it just changed everything. And that's part of what's in the story. And one of the things that I'm sure everybody remembers is just it's the death. Death was everywhere and you couldn't escape it. Early one morning, every morning I walk around the cemetery, which is teeming with grave diggers. I cry. Every day they are digging new graves because people are dying at a rate unseen since the Spanish flu pandemic. Today, by 8 a.m., There were 6 new graves and a 7th being dug. 7 mounds of earth piled high to make room for 7 new coffins. 7 other families who are now in pain and grieving as we are. It's too many. It didn't have to be like this. A responsible federal government would have made efforts to control it sooner. And then to go along with the cemetery, here's another passage that really highlights how bad it was, how many people were dying. Dad was cremated today. He died 17 days ago. That's how badly death has affected New York City. It took more than 2 weeks for a spot to open up for his body. This morning, the funeral home piled many coffins into a truck to drive to a crematorium in Connecticut. They had to cross state lines because the crematoriums in New York are overrun. Just writing these words makes me feel hollow inside. Daddy is dead. All that remains are memories. And I'm going to end with this is actually my spouse's favorite passage in the entire book. It's one last vignette that I'm going to read. 1969. Mom was part of the drama club down at Sacred Heart. She didn't act. She's too shy and doesn't like being the center of attention. Instead, she was part of the set design team. One evening, she was helping to paint the set when my dad walked in. He stood awkwardly in the back of the gym and watched as Mom and others painted. Finally, an older woman turned to Mom and said, "You should go." My mom, completely oblivious, started to protest, so the woman added, "Gary isn't here for me." Mom smiled and put her paint supplies away. Dad offered to walk her to the bus stop. But Dad was nervous, so it wasn't until the bus pulled up and Mom got on that he plucked up the courage to ask her out on a date. As the door closed between them, Mom smiled, nodded, and said yes.
Really powerful work. This especially hit me because, like your dad, my mom died of COVID during the pandemic. So it
I'm
took me a
sorry to hear
while to
that.
get past that. Unlike you, after her death, I could not, I thought I would never write again. I thought my skills and discipline and everything had fled. So hats off to you for being able to write through a very difficult time.
Thank you.
But I noticed that both of your work shares, like, you tackle really tough topics in both of your work, whether it's the role of women or racial prejudice or or death and dying and loss. You both tackle really tough topics. Like, I know with Elizabeth it was through the pandemic that you were writing through grief and pain and loss, but Adele, how did you end up tackling things like racism and women's issues and um
Yeah, well, I mean, I had written some flash fiction before. I mean, I came into flash fiction via poetry. Um, and I came to it all through the pandemic, bizarrely, because I didn't really do a lot of writing before the pandemic. I am a preschool teacher. I was an elementary school teacher in the UK, but here I'm a preschool teacher. So when everything was shut down, I literally had very little to do, whereas all my family were here online, working. I mean, eventually I did have to do like a sort of half an hour show and tell thing on a screen for 3-year-olds, which was a complete nightmare. But that time I spent doing online classes. Um, and I discovered like a flash fiction workshop. So I started to just write the odd story here and there. And some of those stories are in the book, and it really wasn't anything to do with wars. I mean, wars came much later. It was just like one of them is about a woman who is shoplifting baby formula, because she has had to give her baby away, but she's still suffering the trauma of it. And so after a while, I was like, oh, I have a whole collection of different stories, but they were so very different. Some were about women's issues, but I hadn't written anything in the voice of a man. So I was like, oh, let's try that. So there are a few pieces in the book in the voice of a man, but I suppose that is what I'm interested in, and that's where it comes from. I'm interested in the misogyny in society. I read a lot about the politics, both here and back in the UK, and as a sort of newly minted American, I don't know much about American history. I mean, I know, the sort of glossy bits and no taxation without representation, but not very much else. So it was a way to find some of the history, like the history of Native Americans in this part of the world, in Connecticut, was incredibly interesting to me. And I suppose, from there, those all the other things, like the one about the one that I read about the Depression in Appalachia, because I come from South Wales, which is a big mining community, and the seam of coal goes from Wales underneath and comes up in Pennsylvania near Appalachia. So it was all of those links that I loved, and that's what sort of motivated me to put it all together in that way. I know that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, I love it, because I do think that writers, especially in this day and age, are warriors of a sort. When they round up people they want to get rid of, the writers and the intellectuals are the first to go, because writers tend to be truth tellers, and both of you tell big, powerful truths in your work. Elizabeth, what made you start adding the vignettes to your pieces?
Um, when Dad got sick, it was 2 days. Dad got sick day 8. I started the vignettes on day 10. And I actually, in the story, explain it. Writing just about the president can be a bit depressing. Sitting at home, I am telling stories of my childhood to my son. So I'm going to add them here at the end of my daily posts. A tidbit of who I was before I became me. A break from the news, the complaints, and the temper tantrums. So it was just, everything was just too much living in the present. I needed something to make me smile. I needed something to make my readers happy. And I mean, that's one thing they teach you too in every writing class you take. It's like, you can't have everything too sad. You can't have everything too happy. You got to have something to counterbalance. And when it just got too heavy, I brought the vignettes in.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that you were in New York at the time when it was really horrible, when they were, you know, burying bodies on that island. And I understand the long gap between the death date and the funeral date. So, does your book, does it sort of like flip back and forth between present and past with the vignettes? How did you weave that in?
Yes. I mean, the book is, I kept it in blog form. So when you read it, it reads like
Okay.
a diary. It breaks it down day to day. So for each day, it's pretty much, I give you the rundown of what happened that day. There are a couple of flashbacks in that, but each daily post then ends with the vignette from the past.
Mm. So did you post this blog on, like, was it an online blog that other people were reading, and did it garner a lot of, like, viewers? What inspired you to turn your blog into a book?
Um, I've been writing for many years, and I've been trying to get something published for 30 years.
Wow.
When I was about 40 days into the blog, because the book is the first 60 days. So about 40 days in, I realized that with everything that was going on, it did have the potential to be a book because it wasn't just about me. I wrote it about what was going on. And I think I have a
Mhm.
background in history. I'm a history teacher. That background in knowing what's important in primary source documents kind of was in the back of my head. So the whole time I was writing it, I knew that I wasn't just writing it for me in the now. It was a historical
Mhm.
record. So by day 40, I was like, this really could be a book. It could be something that speaks to the pandemic history. Um, so by day 60, I decided 60 would be the perfect time. So even though this blog, I kept this blog for probably at least a year, if not more, writing every day. But I decided 60 days was the good solid way to round it out. So when I wrote that blog post on day 60, I did try to give it an end. Um, as for
Mhm.
readership, it was online, it was public, but most of the people that followed me were just friends and family. And
Mhm.
initially,
Mhm.
hardly anybody was reading it because I was just venting. And then dad got sick, and I picked up more followers because they were all cheering him on. They were all hoping that he was going to pull through. So everybody was checking in every day to see how dad was doing. And then after dad dies, they kept reading because they were checking in on me. They were checking in on mom. They wanted to see how we were all holding up. There were a couple of days where I had almost 1,000 hits, which for me at the time was a lot. In
Oof.
fact, the day that got the most hits was the day that dad went into the hospital. And that passage I read about my son, many of my friends reposted that blog with that short passage just to really highlight what the pandemic was.
Yeah, I mean the irony is that even though the pandemic kept people separated, we actually were kind of connected by technological means and connected by the like a lot of people still don't understand what it means to lose 1.5 million people. You know, we have a shortage of workers now, doctors, allied health workers, regular workers, and people don't realize that we lost 1.5 million people. We might not have a shortage of all these professionals if we had not lost 1.5 million. Not all of those people were old people. You know, some were very young, some were in their 30s and 40s and stuff.
And with the
So,
pandemic too, I mean, you turned
Elizabeth,
on the
how do you
news.
weave the?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm a little jet lagged, so I'm not. I'm sorry. So no, that was fine. Um, Adele, tell me how you weave the past and the present with those stones because the stone walls. I'm taking it still exist,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
they do. Yes. So yes, I mean, um, like I'm trying to go through the history, but you can't obviously hit every every period. So um,
Yeah.
there there there's two or three motives going through. So it's the actual wall itself. There's this white stone which looks a bit like a heart that moves around with people, and they use it as a talisman or a lucky stone. And then from the Native American, there's a big stone that has shaped like cupped hands. So, and that forms part of the wall, and then sometimes it falls over. And so there, I mean, I read when I read the one about the whippoorwills, there was that line about you can be a revolutionary, someone can make you a revolutionary, or
That was a great line.
it's up to you. And so that's why I read the last one about the dandelion, because that actually happened when I was in the car. That whole thing about the dandelions, and somebody before that, somebody saying a song can make you an alcoholic or a revolutionary. So it's little bits like that that sort of link it up. There's
Oh,
one part. There's one part at the beginning where one of there's when I write in the voice of a man, he's building one of the walls, because he's a farmer, but he's also a poet, and his father doesn't like it. So there's this whole group of people that I've invented called the Mosh Up Poets. And then that sort of interweaves, like towards the end, there's an English teacher who's teaching these poets. So I had written one, what I thought was a novella in Flash, which was, but it was basically just stories. Each story, they weren't linked together. And then the UK, there's a publisher called Ad Hoc Fiction, and they were running a competition. So I thought, oh, I'm now going to write one where there's more of a link to all of these stories. So I did that, and I sent it off, and it was shortlisted. So it made me think, oh, okay, I've got something here, but it's not a fully formed manuscript. So I went back and put more links in. So as you can read it, you can dip in and out of it, and each story is self-contained. But if you read it all the way through, then you'll start to notice more of the links. And I wanted it to sort of mimic the walls, like from close up, it looks one way, from a distance, it looks another way. Some of them are broken, some of them are like bringing people together, some are people, putting them people apart. Yeah, so that was my thinking behind it.
That's a really clever idea, especially since probably half of America, if not more than half of America, doesn't know these walls exist in Connecticut. So you're actually raising awareness for things that exist and nobody knows because it's not in any history book about the walls in Connecticut. So my other question is, you said that all of these stories were under 1,000 words.
Yeah.
Did you have to fight to keep them under 1,000 words, or did they just, sort of come out less than 1,000 words? Because it's easier to sort of write on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think but because I was writing for the novella in Flash competition, but the novella in Flash genre, I knew they had to be under 1,000 words, and some are long, so some are longer than were longer than 1,000 words. I cut them down. Some of them are short. Some of them are in the form of a poem. I mean, I've got one about caravanning in Trump's America, which is basically a gardener sending off a poem that he's written to a poetry journal, and it is just one poem. And that's what I love about Flash. You can like, it can be a recipe. There's a letter in there. It can be just a list, and some of them can be like 50 words, some of them can be under 500, some can go all the way up to 1,000. But because I was specifically writing for this publication opportunity, I kept them under 1,000.
So what happened with that publication opportunity? Were you shortlisted for it? How did it end up at Unsolicited Press?
Yeah, so I was shortlisted, and then the person who was organising it, he wrote a very nice email saying, and it was a British publisher. So, I appreciate that an American story, this sort of an American story, might have a limited audience in the UK. So he was just very complimentary. He said, it's a great manuscript. You should try and get it published. I wish you luck with it. So that sort of made me think, oh, well, what I really need to do is try and sub it to some American publishers because it's an American story. I mean, there's there's a couple of British characters at the beginning during colonial times, but it's mainly an American story. So that was how it came about. And since then, I say this one took a long while, and it took a long while to come to be published. Even just signing my contract, I think it's been 2.5 years with Unsolicited Press. And in the meantime, I've had 2 other novellas in Flash published with a publisher that has a much quicker turnaround. So this publishing game it's been a very interesting journey for me. And in fact, one of the novellas came out of one of the stories that are in History of Hand-Thrown Walls. There's one called Wannabe, which is about a group of women. And so what I did with the other novellas, I took that story and I gave all the women backgrounds. And so that became another novella on its own.
Nice. So since you talked about the writing process, let's talk about how each of you approaches the writing process. Do you each write every day? Do you keep journals and diaries? Let's start with Elizabeth. What's your approach to the craft of writing?
I try to carve out at least an hour a day for writing. Working full time and being a mom and active in my son's activities means I don't always have that hour, but I do my best to write every day.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
not much of I don't journal much except when I'm traveling. This summer we spent 5 weeks on the road camping as we headed out west. And I blogged again every day, again to keep family and friends abreast of where we were and what we were doing. And I used to keep a diary or journal when I traveled, but now in the modern age, I moved into blogging. But yeah, I try to get something down every day.
Well, I'm in awe of that.
And what about you, Adele? Do you write every day?
No.
I
Well,
admire that actually.
having said that, I mean, as I said, I came from poetry. I mean, that's how I first started writing during the pandemic. I did some courses on Whitman, um, and then I started to write a few things of my own, not very good at all. And through that, I came to Flash because they have great similarities about, every word has to do heavy lifting because
Yes.
you have a limited word. And then through that, I came to haiku. So I discovered haiku, and I do write haiku every day. I find it like a very mindful practice. And when I first, my first book was a poetry book that I got published, and the publisher said, "Yeah, what's your online presence?" I'm like, I don't have an online presence. I am on Twitter at that time. I follow 3 people: my son, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton, and that was it. And I had no followers. And they're like, well, you need to up your game. And no. I'm like, I have no idea how to up my game. I don't know what that means. But on Twitter, there's a very, very active haiku community. So much so that some people there's one place that posts one word a day, and you can craft a haiku and you publish it on Twitter, which is a absolutely perfect platform for haiku. Like 3 lines. It doesn't have to be.
Mhm.
It's not no longer 575. And through that, I got 2,000 followers. I was like, whoa. I love the haiku community. It's very vibrant, especially in America. So yes, I do write every day, but mainly it's haiku. And then I write more like flash and poetry at the weekend when I have time.
So what is your Twitter handle? We can I should say X. What is your X handle?
So it's
So I could
ad,
put it in the comments so people
okay.
can look for you.
It's ad Libby, which is AD, and then Libby, Libby, and then the number 1.
Adlibby.
Yeah, so because my middle name is Elizabeth,
That's your
so it's Adele, Elizabeth, ad Libby, and then 1, the number 1.
okay.
I'm also on Blue Sky, which
Okay. So
is the same. So, and I'm on Instagram at the same. So,
I think is it AE Libby?
no, AD,
AE
AD for D
oh
for
AD
dandelion. Yeah. Begin like the first 2 letters of my name, AD.
Libby.
Yeah. And then 1, number
Okay,
1.
X handle.
Yeah. At
Oh,
Libby 1.
at Libby1 on X to read haikus,
Yes.
daily
I
haikus.
know the poetry, and
Um,
yeah.
so
But if any
Elizabeth, do you take? I'm sorry. Go ahead,
No,
Adele.
please. No, I wasn't going to say. We was just something about Twitter, so please go ahead.
Okay, and Elizabeth, do you also have an online presence? And the real question I was going to ask is, do you ever use your history, your background in history, in your work, in your writing?
In my writing, not really. When I'm traveling, I hit a lot of historic sites and probably bore a lot of my readers when I go in depth with history. I do include more culture than history in some of my writing. I have one memoir that I'm still trying to get published about Nepal, and there I talk slightly about the history, but more about the culture. That comes out more
You're
in
talking
my
about the
writing.
country Nepal. You're talking
Yes,
about the country of Nepal,
yes,
which just overthrew its government.
Yeah.
yes. I was there though 30 years ago, so it was much different.
Oh, me too. It's a
Yeah.
fabulous country.
Yes, it's a gorgeous country. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the mountains are amazing.
Mm.
As for an online presence, yes, I am on TikTok for all of
Mm.
last year. I did the history, this day in history on TikTok. I haven't this year because I just started a new job, and with my book coming out, I haven't really had time for that. But I do post regularly on TikTok. I post
So what's your TikTok
sometimes on
post?
Instagram. What was that?
What is your TikTok post? What is your
Pop.
TikTok post?
Well, I'm sorry. What was that?
Your TikTok. How can people find you on TikTok?
Oh, at Papa Jaeger, the owl.
Papa, yeah, you want to put it in the comments? You can actually do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. How? Let me see. Can I don't know how.
Oh, all right. So you
Uh,
know what? Is it? It's at Papa Jaeger, PAPPA.
P A P.
Hello.
Now I just lost everything trying to get in. Hold.
You know what? Send it to me on email. I'll copy and paste it into the comments after it posts.
Okay.
It's Papa Jaeger. Papa Jaeger.
The owl.
So yeah, send it to me.
Okay.
So the final questions that I have for you is many aspiring writers watch these streamed readings that come on every other week with Unsolicited Press and Unsolicited Press's newly published writers. What advice do you have for aspiring writers who dream of being published but who are not yet published about either the writing life or what to do,
I
how to
would
get
tell
there,
them.
a little about your journey.
What I would advise is not to give up. I started trying to get something published 30 years ago. It took me 30 years to get to this point. So, um, when those young writers start getting those rejection letters, they should just toss them out and keep writing.
Good advice.
I would
And
agree.
Adele, what?
Well,
Okay,
I came to writing quite late. I never knew that I could write, which seems like a weird thing to say, but I had started a little bit before the pandemic because I have 4 kids, but I only have one daughter. She was my eldest. And she went away to college, and I was left with my 3 sons and my husband, who I love dearly, but who all love what you guys would call soccer, which I call football. And in America, you can watch it literally from 7 in the morning until like 3 in the afternoon. So I was like, what shall I do? What am I going to do? Oh, I know. I'll just try and write a few poems. And as I said earlier on, they were not good. But through that, I came to flash fiction. And so as a young writer, I would look for, like, I always think, your craft. Go online. There are loads of online courses that are free. You don't have to pay. Do some of those. I joined some writing groups in my library. Get some feedback. Because it's very, it can be a very lonely life and you're living in your head. If there are poets out there, young poets, what I would say is write it and read it out loud, record your voice, because that made the biggest difference to me being published and not published. As soon as I started doing that and refining it and editing it down from that, I started to get published more. But the other thing I would add is, it's much easier as a flash fiction writer to get published because your stories are small. Whereas if you are a short fiction writer, you are taking up much more space in an online journal. If you really want to get published, write haiku. Haiku journals publish like 200 writers in one go because you three. So if that is your goal, there are easier ways. There are easy ways to get published. And also look for your niche. So I'm an older writer. I sub to places like Quartet because they're looking for older women writers, or Gyroscope for crones because I'm an older woman. So like if you can sort of increase your odds by being in a niche genre or a niche group, go for it. I mean, I had two, as I mentioned, I'm Welsh. I had two poems published in an anthology, a Welsh English anthology. I earned more from the royalties of just those two poems than I do for most anything else. But again, it's, there's not that many Welsh poets around. There's a lot of Welsh poets, but I mean, you're not competing against hundreds and thousands of people. I was competing against a much smaller pool. So I don't know if that's any help, but I mean, those are the things that I find quite useful. And I would say, same as Elizabeth.
All sage advice.
Yeah, don't give up. I mean, that's the
Go
thing.
ahead.
Don't give up.
So the takeaways for aspiring writers are keep writing, don't give up, find your niche, and most of all, I guess, don't I guess try to find your tribe, because writing can be a lonely endeavor. Because you both have found your tribe, so to speak. So that brings us to the end of our streamed readings. We are going to be again on doing a stream reading 2 weeks from today. And I apologize, I do not have that date at the top of my head, but 2 weeks from today, we will be on again with two more interesting writers. Thank you so much, Adele and Elizabeth, for joining us this evening. Thank you, everyone who's watched. If you want to leave comments, please do. Elizabeth, I'm going to wait for you to email me the your link so that I could post it in the comment sections of both Instagram and YouTube, where your friends and family can watch this. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.